Well, let me just say how delighted I am, and I know the other speakers are, for you taking time to be with us this morning as we are looking at our third annual State of the Community presentation. We said back in 2015 when we began this that we'd come back once a year and report to you on the economy, on the schools, on the arts, and today we're adding a sort of a new area, and that is our poverty reduction initiative. I felt like it was important to elevate that plan to the level of a State of the Community report, and we'll be coming back every year and reporting on our progress on addressing poverty in our community. I have a number of elected officials with us today. I know Dana Jones and Lida Hayes-Cowart from the school board are here. County Commissioner Fleming Elamine is here. Fleming, thank you. We have Councilmember Jeff McIntosh. Oh, I'm sorry, and Lori Goins-Clark is here from the school board as well. Councilmember McIntosh, Councilmember Larson from our city council are here. And of course, I always have to recognize my good friend Larry Womble, former alderman back in those days, and the state representative. Larry, we're delighted that you're here today. Each of the speakers will come forward and give a brief report on their area. And we'll try to move through this quickly as we try to give you as much information as possible. Hopefully we won't feel like taking a drink out of a fire hose, but we're going to try to get through it pretty quickly there. This is our update as we promised there. You know, we said back in 2015 that we wanted to become one of the top 50 metro areas in the country by the year 2020. And what that means is creation of 27,000 net new jobs. Basically, that boils down to about 5,400 jobs per year. And you'll see a little bit later on when we talk about job creation, we hit about 40% of that goal this year. So we're a little bit slow on our job creation, but you'll see hopefully that we're creating the infrastructure and the network that will allow us to hit the job goals that we want to. The three critical projects or programs that we are talking about today, in addition to the schools, the arts, and our poverty initiative, are the Wake Forest Innovation Quarter, the Whitaker Park, and the entrepreneurial culture efforts that we're doing here. Bob Leake will cover the Whitaker Park piece of that, and I'm going to touch on Innovation Quarter. Obviously, this is a wonderful project that's been going on for many years in our community, 145 acres right adjacent to our downtown area. A lot of good things have happened this year. The Big Bailey Power Plant project is almost finished, be finished early next year. It will be a mixed use of offices, retail, restaurants, and be the home for our Venture Cafe operation there. We know that the medical center moved downtown last year, its operation, and we're also so very excited about a new engineering program that Wake Forest University has begun and moved into the Innovation Quarter. We've been talking, some of you in here, Doug Maynard and others, about the need for engineering in our community for decades, and we're finally able to say we've got an engineering program here. There's a new parking deck under construction there in the Innovation Quarter of about 800 spaces, and that will be wrapped by an apartment project of about 340 units. Right now, there are over 3,600 jobs there in the Innovation Quarter, coming from about 153 companies within the quarter. It's been a great growth of the number of companies coming in over the past several years. We are also seeing tremendous investment. Almost $800 million of investment has occurred into the Innovation Quarter in that area, resulting in about 1.9 million square feet of space. I know Dudley Watts likes to see that coming. Dudley and I were just talking about how much investment it takes to move the needle on the tax base, and I think this moves the needle a little bit because even though these could be nonprofit or non-tax paying, we have an agreement with Wake Forest that they do pay the payment in lieu of taxes. Thank you for creating that. There are also almost 12,000 students that are interacting in the Innovation Quarter on a weekly basis there from Forsyth Tech, from the medical school, and others coming in there. And there are about 734 individuals living there. In terms of entrepreneurial and innovation, we're working hard to create an entrepreneurial ecosystem here. Fancy word for really want Winston-Salem to be viewed as a good place to start and grow a business in our community. We're trying to do that in 4 different ways. One is to kind of create a congregation space and ability for individuals to come together. And we're delighted that we were selected to be one of 5 cities in the world to house and host a venture cafe. The other cities are Cambridge, Massachusetts, St. Louis, Missouri, Miami, Florida, and Rotterdam, of all places, and now us, one of 5 cities. And what that does, once a week, every Thursday, you'll have about 150 or so entrepreneurs, innovators, and people who are interested in that will come together for some social activities, but also there'll be 3 or 4 classes, symposiums every Thursday to create that. We also are working to create additional incubation space. That's one of the things that we've been woefully lacking in. Certainly we have the Flywheel operation, which is a strong program, about 10,000 square feet, and they recently relocated to the CDI. But we were way behind. For instance, in St. Louis, they have almost 200,000 square feet of incubation space. So we're delighted that beginning this fall, we'll have an additional 30 to 50,000 square feet of incubation space coming online in the GMAC building in a program called the Winston Starts. And we have to thank our good friend Don Flo, who is making that space available for free for our community. And then also opening this fall will be a mixer space, a space where you can go use all kind of wonderful equipment if you want to have an idea to build something. Up on Martin Luther King Boulevard, the mixer will be opening up. We're also working to create venture capital, which is the lifeblood, if you will, of new company startups. We have a goal of creating about $30 million of venture capital, and we're about halfway there with that. You may have seen that Tony Atala and the Regenerative Medicine Program recently got a $20 million grant for his program. That's really interesting. It's going to be trying to apply advanced manufacturing techniques to his research in growing body parts and tissues and things of that nature. So that's an interesting concept. And then there's also been a $2 million business investment fund created in the Triad here by our local Northwest Council of Governments. So good efforts in that regard. Here's some of the numbers, and Gail will go into much more detail on this, but just wanted to point out to you that you see in last year at this time our unemployment rate was 5.1%. It's dropped now to 4.2%. It compares very favorably with the Triad at 4.2% and our good friends in Greensboro at 4.5%. So, most folks would say that's full employment, but we know that there are parts of our community that have much higher unemployment rates than that. Here's that job growth number. Last year, we had a net gain of about 2,065 jobs, which was less than 1% growth. Greensboro was a little bit ahead of us at 1.1%, and of course, Charlotte continues to hum along at 2.5%. But looking at 2 little bullet dots down at the bottom, we may be getting a little bit of traction. 26% of our local employers are planning to add staff here in the 3rd quarter, compared to 21% last year that was planning to add staff. And then looking at the 4th quarter, 24% of employers plan to add staff compared to 17% last year. Some other factors, and ones that we always look at, is the amount of construction that's going on in our community. Last year, we had $614 million of permitted construction in our city. That's up 28% year over year. And the interesting piece of that is that there was $359 million was non-residential construction, and that's a 10-year high. And the interesting thing, the most recent 10-year high was 2015, so we're seeing a good continuing trend there. And it looks like this year is going to be another good year, because just last quarter we had $119 million of non-residential construction. Jason Thiel came in a little while ago. Now he is thrilled and continue to see our center city just continuing to hum along. We've documented $1.5 billion of investment since 2001 with residential, hotels, office, and retail. We know that it's continuing. There are 4 hotels that are either under construction or have been announced in our downtown. 2 large apartment projects are underway. The GMAC building that I mentioned to you that Don Flo is redoing. So we're continuing to get really good traction. One little cute thing that we've done is start a bike share program. You've probably seen the bike racks all over downtown and all over the center part of the city. Since we opened that thing up, Dee Dee Adams is here, our council member from the North Ward, and council member Dan Bessie joined us as well. We opened that up back in May or June, I guess it was. I can't remember, but since that time, there's been 2,200 rides on that bike share program. It's a real cool program. You can download an app and go get a bike for an hour, and it's like $1 an hour or something like that. So it's a great program. We're continuing to see good results of our Convention and Visitors Bureau here. Last year we had $846 million of expenditures, and that's up 4.6%, which is a great number to be up just because of the fact that, as you know, we did a complete renovation of our Benton Convention Center. And our Convention and Visitors Bureau and the staff up there, Twin City Quarter, did a great job of keeping it open and working around the construction. And we know that our airport, and Bob Leake will probably talk about that, but our airport is so crucial to our economic development initiatives. We had more passengers there. We're up about 4.6% year to date. We always like to brag a little bit about recognitions. The Council for Community and Economic Research ranked Winston-Salem as one of the most affordable places to live. And Councilmember James Taylor just came in just as we said that, and so he's always pushing for good budget control there. And the reason the council members were coming in a little bit late was that we just had a big ribbon cutting just up on North Point Boulevard, a new police substation up there. U.S. News and World Report ranked Winston-Salem as 37th best place to live in the country. CNBC ranked us as one of the top 50 places for millennials, which is interesting. The only other North Carolina cities to make the top 50 were Charlotte, Raleigh, and Durham. So we're happy to be in that top 50. And as you can see, Nationwide Insurance ranked us as number 5 out of 400 metros for the health of our housing market. So kind of covered a little bit of the pieces of that. We're going to now follow the program with, be followed by Bob Leake, then Gail Anderson, Evan Raleigh, Jim Sparrow, and Dr. Emery will come forward in that order. And then I'll come back up and make a few closing comments.
Well, good morning. It's delightful to see so many faces in this room, standing room only crowd. Thank you all for taking an hour and a half out of your day to come hear what's going on in our community. And it's exciting. There are a lot of great things that are going on. I get to talk about capital projects again this year, a little different. I normally talk about just pure economic development issues. So I'm delighted to be here today to bring you an update on some of the things that are going on throughout our community as it relates to capital and infrastructure improvement. Putting this together requires reaching out to a number of colleagues around the community, and I really want to thank Pat Ivey, Jason Thiel, and Derwick Page for helping me get my numbers correct and getting my information correct. So what I present you today comes from that. I've broken this presentation really into 3 key areas. I'm going to talk a little bit about community projects, sites and facilities, and then close with transportation. As I said, the past 2 years, having quality infrastructure throughout the community is vital. It's the foundation on which everything else is built. Without good roads, abundant utilities, increased residential opportunities, parks, education, recreational facilities, community spaces, and physical locations for business to operate their businesses out of, communities will not be competitive and will not grow. And I think the good news that you're going to hear today from all of our speakers is that we're moving forward in all of these areas. We're making things happen. We're in a positive place. So let me start with community projects. For the past 2 years, I've really only been able to report on things that were underway. We're starting this, we're working on that. Well, I'm pleased to say today that I've got a few green check marks, and green check marks represent things that have actually been completed over the course of the past 2 or 3 years. And so I really want to talk specifically about those and then give you an update on some of the other key initiatives that are going on in these areas. First, as the mayor already said, Benton Convention Center opened just a few months ago. This $17.5 million project now allows Winston-Salem to continue to be competitive for national and regional events of all types, conventions and meetings. If you haven't been in to see this newly renovated facility, you need to go see it. It's remarkable. Remembering what the old facility looked like, the new one is spectacular, and I think that, coupled with some of the changes that are underway at the hotels that are adjacent to the property, are going to make this an even better place for those meetings to come. Of course, sitting prominently at the eastern entrance to our city, right next to Winston-Salem State University, is Union Station. We're well underway with the $18.3 million upgrade of this facility. Demolition and grading have already been complete. You ride by it right now and the windows are boarded up. That's only because they're working on the interior of that space right now, and they're just trying to keep people out as they continue to do that work. That restoration and renovation of office and retail space will be completed, we believe, by the end of 2018. Moving along, downtown residential, the mayor already alluded to the fact that there's a number of residential units that are underway. Of course, there's a new condo development at the corner of 4th and Marshall that's just about complete. As the mayor said, Innovation Quarter just broke ground on a 340-unit additional apartment complex that is well underway. Plans have been announced for an additional apartment project on 4th Street adjacent to the GMAC building. We are working with a developer who is looking to do about a 185-unit apartment complex out at Whitaker Park. And then finally, long-term plans continue to have additional apartment opportunities adjacent to the ball field. When I checked in with my friend Jason Thiel, he sent me the statistics on downtown residential, and we will soon have in excess of 4,000 residential units in downtown Winston-Salem. And I think that's quite remarkable because 4 or 5 years ago, we had about 250 to 300. So there's an awful lot of positive in that space. Another signature project for Winston-Salem and Forsyth County is the Central Library. Again, if you haven't driven down 5th Street in a while, I encourage you to take that route on your way home and look at the brand new Forsyth County Central Library. It is absolutely spectacular. It opened last month and was dedicated to the citizens of Forsyth County. And this $28 million project is now a state-of-the-art public library complete with meeting space, computer rooms, children's space, outdoor space, and more. It is quite fantastic. Again, another signature project for downtown Winston-Salem. Work continues on the design and getting ready for the implementation of Marshall Plaza. It's a bit on hold right now because I'm sure you've read in the paper there are other projects around it, around the Pepper Building, around the downtown Children's Museum that are also in process, and so the idea is to kind of wait and complete Marshall Plaza in concert with those developments. But that is in place, and again, plans are underway for that. Other bond projects that are out there that I think if you have a moment, go to 2014bonds.cityofws.org and you can see kind of a status update. If you recall, back in 2014, there was $139.2 million bond package unanimously approved by the voters in 2014. And there's 5 general areas that are covered under the bond package. You can go up and pull up specific items under that. The first is recreation, and there's 15 total projects, and a few that I would highlight is the recently completed Quarry Park, taking an old quarry on kind of the southwest side of town and turning it into a 220-acre outdoor park. Improvements at Winston Lake, recently completed Jamison Park, which is a 36-acre park on Meadowlark Drive. Improvements are coming at Salem Lake Marina and Hobby Park, just to name a few. On the public safety front, as we've already noted, ribbon was cut today on one of the 3 new police station upgrades. Those are now complete. There are 3 fire stations that are under complete renovation. And again, if you drive down, particularly on Arbor Road, Renolda, and Ogburn, you can see that all of those are well underway, and some are really just a few days from opening. On the streets and sidewalk side, this is kind of a continuing process, but you can't go anywhere in town and not see roads being paved, sidewalks being built, infrastructure improvements taking place, and that will continue. On the housing front, the 757 North apartments are recently completed. They're over adjacent to the Innovation Quarter and are very, very attractive apartments in that northern part of downtown. On the economic development front, the city and county both participated in helping fund the extension of Enterprise Drive at Union Cross Business Park. That particular road is now complete and opens up a 13-acre site that was previously unavailable for business and industry. We have several companies looking at that. And it also provides safer traffic flow for the tenants of that park, both in and out. We're working on a spec building out at Union Cross Business Park, and also working with a local private developer to potentially invest in a new 150,000 square foot building that we hope will be underway this fall. And again, that will give us a place for business to do what they do, because right now we continue to be a bit challenged on those. And then finally, there are other additional projects in addition to the 5 stated areas, and some of those are Happy Hill Park on redevelopment and upgrade of that particular park. Haynes Park, they're doing facility upgrades and are trying to convert that back. Continuous parkland acquisition, always looking for additional green space for the city. More renovations to the public safety center to come. Of course, widening Meadowlark Drive from Country Club to Robin Hood Road to make that more passable now that that area has continued to grow. And then finally, in concert with some work on Business 40, doing things like changing out street lights and other aesthetic improvements that are available. Well, about 2 years ago, the Planning Board came out with a report taking a look at various land opportunities, and the one that I was most interested in was industrial development opportunities. And Paul Norby was telling me just recently that that report indicates that the city of Winston-Salem is over 2,000 acres short of what is needed to be competitive in economic development. Again, finished land ready to go for places for existing companies to expand and for other companies to move into. We're working on improving that. A couple of key projects that I'd like to quickly summarize. One is on the right, Whitaker Park. This is a magnificent gift that was given by, obviously given by R.J. Reynolds to the community. We are working hard to repurpose that. There are a number of organizations that are actively involved in that repurposing. We're working with a private developer looking at taking the old manufacturing space and the old distribution space, converting that into a mixed use and light industrial center. And then on the east side, we have a combination of things such as residential, laboratory space, and some greenfield land to do further redevelopment. We also have additional sites out there that can be built on for companies that want to come in and build something new from scratch. The city also worked with Winston-Salem Business Inc. to essentially provide $2.5 million for a spec building. There's a site rendering on the left there of a possible location at Union Cross Business Park. But the idea is to loan that money, get a building built. Once that building is occupied, that money is returned back to the city. I'll go back and ask them again if we can borrow it, and if everything works properly, that will be an important location. And then also represented on the bottom left, this is a 100-acre site that when Dell left the market, we bought, Winston-Salem Business Inc. bought it from Dell. And that is, we believe, future home to about 1 million square feet of industrial space, and that is where one of the spec buildings we are looking at possibly locating. The mayor already talked about what's going on at Innovation Quarter, so I won't cover that. And then finally, let me wrap up transportation. This is probably, is one of the biggest areas where we've made strides over the course of the last 4 or 5 years. What is really exciting as you start looking at all the projects that are underway or plan to be underway, DOT has announced more than $2 billion of capital improvements coming to Winston-Salem and Forsyth County. $2 billion. Some of these are pretty apparent. You see them as you ride around. One of the first is the Winston-Salem Beltway that you see on the top left corner. There's the road for the first 3-mile leg, and then additionally beyond that, there's another portion planned to start late in 2018. Idles Road extension that you see there in the middle will improve access through Clemens, better access to the recently announced county industrial park on Idles Road, and will make moving around kind of the western part of Winston-Salem and Forsyth County much easier. If you've recently been through or south of Winston-Salem on US 52, you see the new arches that have been installed there at the recently completed Salem Creek Connector. That is now open. It's our access point into downtown Winston-Salem from the south, and it's quite exciting to get off down there now and be able to drive right through the Innovation Quarter. The US 52 upgrades north of downtown have been complete. Pat Ivy tells me as of 5 o'clock today. And of course there are future repaving and widenings coming for that. And then finally, the big project of all, the closing and rehabilitation of Business 40, which you see on the bottom left, will begin this fall with the upgrade at the Peters Creek interchange, followed by the closing of I-40 for about 1.5 years while they repair 9 bridges and 2 pedestrian bridges and reopen sometime in late 2019, early 2020. Making access through downtown much, much better. That is a very quick overview of the updates of the capital projects. I'll turn it over to Gail Anderson to talk about some other community initiatives. Thank you.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here today, and also it's really inspiring to see all of you sitting out there that we still have this great degree of interest in our community about how we're doing, and I'm happy to report to you today. My task is to talk about jobs in the economy and the progress that we've made, and to note the trends in both the Winston-Salem Metro and the Winston-Salem Forsyth County rankings since last year. So given the job creation goal that the mayor stated, we have more work to do to reach our objectives. The past 2 years, we've been laying the groundwork for moving forward. So this chart that you see is a comparison of net job growth for 2015 and for 2016. As you can see, we created a total of 4,135 jobs over those 2 years. Mecklenburg, as would be expected, led job creation over the 2 years with 55,525 jobs. Wake County wasn't far behind, given its relative size, with 40,706 jobs. Guilford is very interesting. It had 2 very different years, but if you take the 2 years together, it created a total of 8,295 net new jobs. And then we added, for comparison's sake, a few other counties. Durham County, 6,160, Buncombe, 8,197, New Hanover, 6,669. So if you put all that together, what that means is Winston-Salem Forsyth County was 6th in job creation among these counties. But you have to keep in mind that a number of these counties have much larger populations and labor bases than we do, so it is somewhat relative. If we look at the state as a whole, and I know you can't read all of the numbers, but just look at the colors, this map shows the 12-month percent change in employment for all industries, and it's from September of 2015 to September of 2016, which was the latest data that we could get from the state. In that time frame, our employment increased 1.1% for that 1-year period. But the colors really tell the story. The lightest blue colors show the counties with the lowest positive percentage increase in employment. And you can see, you all know where Forsyth is. We're in one of those light blue counties there. The counties in yellow and orange actually had net losses in jobs over the same period. And you can certainly see they're concentrated in the east and the southeast primarily, a little bit in the west. In 2015, Forsyth County, this was last year when I reported, Forsyth County ranked 46th among the 100 counties in percent change of employment. Last year, 2016, we ranked 49th. However, on the bright side, our average weekly wage remained 5th among the 100 counties, meaning that more of our jobs are higher paying than in most parts of the state. This chart here, which I showed last year as well, shows the top industries and the average weekly wages. And we're comparing here a longer time horizon because it's much more interesting to look at a longer time horizon when you look at wage changes in wage. So these charts show the changes from 2001 to 2016, obviously a 15-year period. It's not surprising to anyone in this room that our manufacturing segment has shrunk over that time period. In 2001, manufacturing was 16.5% of our workforce, with an average weekly wage of $1,175. 15 years later, manufacturing is 8.8% of our workforce, and the average wage has dropped slightly to $1,171, so about $4 a week. The wage numbers are adjusted for inflation over the 15-year period, so the wage comparisons are apple to apple. You'll also see that healthcare and social assistance is now our largest industry segment, accounting for 19% of our jobs. So think about that. It's now exceeded where manufacturing was in 2001 in terms of percent of jobs. Healthcare wages rose over the 15-year period by about $65 per week. Retail trade remained about the same at a little over 11%, but wages dropped slightly, about $25 a week. Educational services grew slightly by 1%, and average wages grew the most by about $200 per week. Accommodations and food service also grew by about 2.5%, with wages increasing very slightly. And then the last category, administrative and support services, showed a 1% growth rate, and average wages here also grew about $75 a week. So if you take all of those sectors together, they represent about 2/3 of the jobs in our economy. Finally, looking at, now these are Winston-Salem metro rankings. These are slightly different from the data we've seen so far, which has all been about Winston-Salem, Forsyth County. These rankings are the metro area, which is defined as Forsyth, Stokes, Yadkin, Davie, and Davidson counties. So different people rank and create, it's really hard to compare apples to apples, but this is for the metro area. And so if we look at Moody's Analytics, they analyze 392 U.S. metro areas and look at 12 key indicators. It's generally accepted that Moody's provides the most complete coverage on the current and expected economic conditions for the nation's metropolitan areas. It analyzes key indicators such as the cost of doing business, employment, income, housing activity, and bankruptcies. In 2015, the Winston-Salem Metro, remember it's the Metro, that 5-county area, ranked 136th out of the 392. In 2016, we were 201st. The second ranking, the Brookings ranking, tracks the economic performance of the nation's 100 largest metro areas. So remember, Moody's does 392. Now Brookings shrinks it down to 100 largest metropolitan areas. And it looks at growth, prosperity, and inclusion. So there's somewhat different factors as well. A lot of people believe that these rankings provide leaders across the country with a set of objective metrics to guide their efforts in figuring out how to advance regional economies, regional, not local economies, that work for the entire community. In 2015, our Winston-Salem Metro, the 5-county area, ranked 57th out of 100. In 2016, we were 79th. Finally, we looked last year at our rankings by Area Development Magazine, which is one of the resources used most often for corporate relocation. It also includes a host of indicators that are different from the other ones. It includes educational achievement levels of the workforce, wage and salary growth, goods and production growth. It looks at 5-year growth, including employment and per capita GNP, and year-over-year growth, all of which are combined into one overall ranking, if you can believe that. And we ranked, in 2016, we ranked 223rd out of the 379 metro areas that it uses, down slightly from 209th in 2015. So in summary, there are many factors in an economy, and it's helpful to note that our strengths are medical research, our proximity to high-growth areas, our high affordability of everything, and our low business cost. These factors will serve us well as we go forward into the future. Our areas for improvement are a need to accelerate growth, to continue to diversify our economy, and to focus on accelerated job creation to ensure more stable employment opportunities for everyone. Many, as the mayor and Bob Leake have said, many of the opportunities in our community lie in the recent work to redevelop Whitaker Park, our continued focus on creating jobs in the Wake Forest Innovation Corridor, and most recently, the Chamber's initiative to identify economic opportunities related to and around Smith Reynolds Airport. These are incredible assets that our community has, and they can be leveraged exponentially to ensure that our job growth numbers and our rankings increase over the next few years. Thank you.
Good morning. I echo everything that's been said. It's good to be with you this morning and good to see such a wonderful turnout for this event. If you remember, many of you, I'm sure, attended last year where we shared a number of community indicators with you. And chief among those indicators was the community's poverty rate. As you think about indicators of a community's health and well-being, there are arguably few that are more important for a community to stay in tune with and try to address than poverty. And as the mayor alluded to at the start, that's been the focus, fortunately for us here in Winston-Salem, of a very intensive, sustained effort for the better part of the last 18 months. And I think it's important just to set the stage for those that may not be aware. Much has been written about poverty in Winston-Salem. And when I say poverty, I'm using the federal definition, meaning for a family of 4, that's an income of somewhere in the neighborhood of $24,000 a year. For a single person household, that's an income of less than $12,000 a year. And so you can see from this graph here, this graph compares where Winston-Salem stands in relation to the other major municipalities across the state. You can see where they're in the salmon color, if you can't read it, that's about 24.1% based on the 2014 census data, which puts us obviously well above our other major metropolitan areas in the state. And it also puts us well above the state and national averages for poverty. We also know that there is a great disparity in our community in terms of who is living in poverty. You can see from this chart based on the 2014 census data that roughly, really approaching 50% of our Hispanic and Latino residents lived in poverty, and just north of 30% of our African American residents lived in poverty. We also know that there's a great disparity in terms of where those folks experiencing poverty live, and this map is representative of that. This is a map of the census tracts that comprise the city of Winston-Salem. And as you can see, the areas that are shaded in dark orange represent census tracts where between 40 and 60% of the population lives in poverty. And the areas that are shaded in dark red represent census tracts where in excess of 60% of the population lives in poverty. So the takeaway here is that poverty has been growing over time, and it's been getting more consolidated. We're seeing a contraction in terms of the spread of that poverty over our community. So it's highly concentrated. And so it was against this backdrop that Mayor Joines, Councilmember Derwin Montgomery, along with the support of the City Council, convened a group that became known as the Winston-Salem Poverty Thought Force. And it was a group that was comprised of our civic, governmental, academic, and nonprofit leadership across the community, and was very capably chaired by Dr. Rogan Kirsch, who is the provost at Wake Forest University. And this group was tasked with trying to reverse this rising tide of poverty that we've seen in our community over the recent years, and developing solutions that would arrest that continuing growth. And so, obviously, the first question to be answered by the group was, when you think of poverty, that's an incredibly horizontal issue. It cuts across a number of different areas. And so the Thought Force recognized that and decided to divide its focus into the five, what we call constituent areas of poverty that you see listed on the screen there. I won't read them to you, but the idea is that if you can look at the critical issues that affect people in poverty in each of these five different areas, that collectively what you could come up with are strategies that would be able to positively influence our poverty rate. And so the Thought Force had two primary criteria for the recommendations and solutions that would ultimately make their way into the final report. And number one was that the solution be highly impactful, meaning that if implemented, it would have a very positive effect on poverty, that it be impactful. And the second criteria was that the solution be highly feasible, meaning that it actually stood a chance of being implemented. It's nice to think about very grand policies, but if they don't have any real hope of being implemented, it doesn't make sense to put them forward. So given political considerations, given budgetary considerations, let's make sure that what we put in this report actually stand a chance of being implemented. And this picture is just a representation of the method by which the solutions were developed. And this was what we called a World Cafe that was hosted at in the atrium of the biotech place over in Innovation Quarter. And what these meetings were designed to do were to be gatherings of folks across a very broad, a broad representation of the community, folks not only affected by poverty, but some who may never have experienced poverty before. And to get these groups of folks together around tables, having discussions about a specific topic to try and come up with the the best solutions as a collective. So the thought force very much strayed away from trying to be a group that was sitting in a room devising these solutions without the input of the community. We're very intentional in the design of these. So we hosted 5 of these World Cafes, or excuse me, 6 actually, across a series of months that focused on each of those 5 thematic areas that you saw earlier in the presentation. And what emerged from these extended conversations with the community was originally a set of more than 400 recommendations across those 5 areas. And the thought force spent a great deal of time. It took a period of several months to sort of sort through all of that information and take a very critical look at each and every one of those solutions that was put forward, again, by members of the community. And that ultimately resulted in a total of 56 recommendations that were put forward in the final report of the thought force that was authored earlier this year and released. And I think it's important, again, to note that these 56 recommendations were, again, not just devised by folks sitting in a room. After the big list came out, the thought force went back out to the community in several different mediums to be able to get input and insight in terms of the recommendations that would ultimately find their way into this report. They did that via community meetings and through a survey, which I'm sure some of you in the room may have taken, asking you what your thoughts were with respect to which solutions were the most highly impactful and highly feasible in each of those areas. This report, since its release, has been formally endorsed by Mayor Joines and members of the City Council. It has been endorsed by the Forsyth County Board of Commissioners, and it has also received a formal endorsement from the governing body of the Winston-Salem Chamber of Commerce. And so I'll touch just briefly on the conclusions that were highlighted in the report and surfaced as the thought force went through this work. Number one is that coordination and visibility are key. The thought force identified more than a dozen community-based poverty alleviation efforts that are currently underway in the community, some of which are going forward with great fanfare, and others may only be known to residents of a particular neighborhood. But what was critical, that the thought force viewed as a critical first step in taking strides forward with respect to poverty and alleviating it, was raising awareness of these programs to all members of the community. And so that sort of led to the second conclusion there, which was the need for a poverty reduction coordinator, a person or persons that would be responsible for that awareness raising, for that evaluation of the initiatives that are currently underway, for coordinating and aligning all of those efforts such that they can, again, positively impact our poverty rate. Third was that you must take a comprehensive approach, and this is something I alluded to earlier, that no single program focused strictly on food insecurity or strictly on jobs or strictly on education or strictly on housing has any opportunity by itself to move a community out of poverty. It takes a system-wide approach to be able to see advances in your efforts to alleviate poverty. So you have to address all of those simultaneously to have hope of a positive outcome. And the fourth conclusion was quite interesting. Although it wasn't, transportation wasn't separately explored as a thematic area on its own, across all of the conversations, no matter whether we were talking about housing and homelessness or food access and insecurity or jobs and workforce development, transportation and the need for a highly functioning, highly accessible public transportation system continued to bubble up across all of those conversations. So transportation matters, and that's a critical element that underpins all of these initiatives with respect to alleviating poverty. And then finally, national initiatives. Winston-Salem is not unique in terms of its efforts to reduce poverty. There are a number of communities across the state, across the country that are doing things very similar to us. And so some of those efforts have given rise to national initiatives such as the Bridges communities, such as the IBM Smarter Cities, such as Strong at Home, such as Purpose-Built Communities. All of these national initiatives are going on in other places, and the Thought Force recognized it might be important for us to look at those efforts and try to glean what we can from efforts of other communities to make sure that we aren't doing this in isolation. Obviously with an approach that's unique to Winston, but can be informed by what is occurring in other communities. And so if you are curious about seeing the full report, I think it's 60 pages in length, we have established a website for the Thought Force that you can learn more, see the full report, see what's planned for the future, and engage with us. And I will tell you that solving poverty is not a short-term proposition. I'm sure that many of you are aware of that. But I think observing the work of the Thought Force, I can feel confident in saying that we have certainly laid the groundwork for a very successful initiative. But it will take a sustained effort. And we hope that many of you will be a part of that as we move forward. Thank you very much.
Good morning. It's great to see you all here, and I'm here to talk about arts and culture. And as you see from my slide, what I'm calling this is building a canvas for economic success. All of the slides, as I lay them out, will really talk about the importance of arts and culture, not just as a quality of life element, but for us to compete in this environment around economic development. I'll just raise as one of those examples, we're all very familiar with what's been out in terms of the competition for the new Amazon headquarters. Just as important as infrastructure, site readiness, and investment in terms of tax breaks, the expectations on that list include many of the elements I'll talk about. It has become an expectation, and it is vitally important that we look at that. And before anyone says, well, it was $1 million plus, they actually qualified that by saying they didn't care if it was the same city, it could be within a region. So if we're thinking that way, we could meet all the criteria to compete for something like that in a regional way regarding our proximity to Greensboro with Guilford and Forsyth in terms of over $1 million and many of those amenities. So what are the elements? These are the elements that everyone's talking about and the things that I will say a lot of good work has been done. My predecessor, Milton Rhodes, as well as many of you, have done great work in terms of building the momentum around many of these elements, but just to make sure we're talking about things in perspective. Creative place, public art, inclusive vibe, entrepreneurial acceptance, and creative possibilities. Amenities, spaces, and designs, anchor assets that are both form and function, define the experience in the city brand, environmentally friendly and aware. Culture, the big C, a combination of traditional, new, and outside the box. Think of culture as a verb, not a series of nouns or institutions. And Winston, like others, has seen this, as I mentioned, and identified. So how do we compete, and how do we stack up, and where are the challenges? Just recently completed the most recent American for the Arts economic impact numbers. As you'll see with this, we actually stack up fairly well. But what I will stress is the metrics in terms of these particular measurements are largely around what we consider traditional assets. They do not include all of the elements now when we talk about a broader definition of culture. But from that standpoint, you see that Forsyth County actually does quite well and stacks up very well within its many other comparable North Carolina cities. What I will say is when you look at Durham, if I were to put Raleigh up here, Raleigh has actually included theirs in a metropolitan number that includes Durham and Raleigh. And when you look at the comparison there, actually the Guilford-Forsyth numbers are very comparable. So you see that we're actually competing in a traditional way very well. I mentioned Des Moines, and I put this down here for a very specific reason. It's going to set up the next series of slides. In 2004, Des Moines, Iowa, impact was about $54 million in terms of the impact for these traditional arts organizations. In 2008, they went through a variety of community planning called Capital Crossroads that was a combination of not just cultural planning, but complete planning for the community in terms of how Des Moines was going to compete. And with that, a number of things were implemented. They were integrated, and they included both local and regional strategies, but most of that included various engines. In this particular case, they put in a public funding mechanism for arts and culture. So that public funding measure was passed 10 years ago. By 2010, you see the increase of 102 million. Today, the most recent is 185, and estimates on the same track in terms of the combination of public-private with the engine. 2020, 230 million. So you see that that investment is paying off in terms of their ability to compete. So as I mentioned, the public engine, Des Moines, the occupancy as an engine, it was an occupancy tax. I'm not advocating, so before Rich gets upset, I'm not advocating for the occupancy tax per se. But what I am saying is that when you look at Des Moines, their strategy was an occupancy tax, and they also have a percent for art. That's for operating art, the various arts institutions, zoos, and festivals. In North Carolina, Charlotte has a percent for art, car rental and occupancy, Fayetteville and occupancy, Raleigh, Asheville, Chapel Hill all have a percent for art, and referendums are being positioned for an ongoing funding stream. Chattanooga, Greenville, Greensboro, all dealing with public-private strategies for major amenity anchors, cultural accessibility, and operations. They're not one-offs, but ongoing partnership strategies. So I'm stressing this only because we're behind. We're one of the few North Carolina cities that doesn't have either a public engine for art or a percent for art. And there are things that we have to be careful of because, as I mentioned, the traditional numbers are strong, but these are the elements that are necessary for us to continue to compete. I mentioned Grand Rapids because this is a slightly different strategy, but one that I put out there. Grand Rapids, with the help of the DeVos family, started something called Art Prize. It's the largest international public art festival in the world. And the impact has been huge in terms of what it's done, not only for the brand, but the ability to attract creative industry. The return is immense, and the brand is huge. When you drive through the region up there, all throughout the region, there's advertisements of good food, cool nights, and hot art. They have become an art destination and a creative destination. The relocation and of creative industry to that community because of that investment is huge, as is the tourism. So, building on strengths, new tools to compete. As I mentioned, the public funding and potentially a percent for art. They don't have to be mutually exclusive, but looking at that. Collaborative cultural strategy. When I'm talking about culture, I'm not talking about just traditional arts and institutions. I'm talking about lifestyle, culture, food, sports, entertainment, a collective strategy for those things that are necessary. So those bring in more dollars from outside in a variety of ways and also allow us to deal with regional cultural marketing and funding strategies. As I mentioned, one of the strategies for a public engine for this could be a regional strategy when you deal with the airport tax, you deal with car rental, and various others. Again, not advocating, but pointing out that these are what other communities are doing to compete. So also to continue to develop an integrated experience with our facilities, downtown, and design. As I mentioned, that's important. We're doing that, but I'm stressing that. And then cultural planning. I think it's time for us to consider, again, full community and integrated cultural planning that is an integrated process. This shouldn't be about what the community can do for the arts, but what the arts can do for the community from an economic development standpoint, from an education standpoint, and a collective in terms of those priorities, just as I mentioned that Des Moines did. And that's really what I have to say. We're in a good place, and I think there's a lot we can do, but I stress that we want to make sure we stay ahead of the curve. So thank you very much.
You've been really good students. So take a deep breath. I will move quickly. You've been a great and attentive class. Before I get started, I like your checks. Those green checks, those appeal to me. And so I first want to say thank you to this community, for our county commission and our partners at the county, and all of you who, by show of huge support, passed a $350 million bond issue since we were in this room last. This afternoon, we break ground at Paisley for the new Paisley-Lawrence facility. Our board has accepted bids on Conoke, and this summer we began installation of the $24 million piece of that package, which puts a new technology solution in every classroom in this school district. Behind that is a contract for training. So I want you to know that it's not just the stuff, but as we move through these schools installing, all of the staff will be trained. And our board last year also invested $3 million in Discovery Ed. If you haven't seen it, It's the latest, greatest version of online resources, curriculum, support in math, social studies, science, and we have great utilization of that resource even before all of these classroom installations have occurred. So I thank you greatly for the opportunities that await us as we roll out this capital improvement for our school system. But you really didn't come to hear about buildings from me. You came to hear about the 54,000 kiddos who arrive every day in your 81 schools in this district. And I appreciate the comments that have come before. Sometimes it's a little challenging to bat last. But I do want to say that all of the things you've heard here arrive at school. So this year, our poverty rate is up. We have a 58% free and reduced lunch rate. That's how we measure poverty in schools. Of our 81 schools, 32 have 100% free and reduced lunch. And as you look at this data, I ask for your grace, because absolutely there is a correlation between outcomes and what we are studying by way of a poverty thought force. We've worked hard in our district, however, not to make that a mindset. All of our children are smart, they can all achieve, and one of our core values and beliefs is that how we as adults expect, act, and behave absolutely has an impact on how students achieve. I'm starting with the happiest of these pieces of data, and one that most all of you, as I look around, we have so many amazing partners have helped contribute to over time. You know, this has grown steadily every year. Our goal is to be at 90% next year. And I want to put this sort of aggregate number in context for you, and let me stop and say, if you go to our website and you go to the accountability site, you can look at everything here, and you can look at it in way more detail. You can disaggregate it, you can look at it by school, you can look at it till you fall asleep or until you want to send me an email, but there's lots of data loaded on our site. Of the high schools in this district, last year I was able to share with you that 6 of them had already reached the 90% graduation rate. We added 4 more this year to that. So we are narrowing the number of schools that have not reached 90%, and so that allows us to be very targeted and supportive and helpful in the schools that are not there yet. We expect those who've reached it to maintain or exceed, but it does allow us to shift from this big view of how do we improve graduation and really focus on the schools that need the most support. I haven't changed my slides in 3 years. I just update them because I think this is a form of accountability. So our goals are the same. 90% of our 3rd graders will read on grade level or above by 2020. We talked about graduation. The goal we plan to meet, and I hope next year I'll be able to do a little hula dance or something, and you can help me celebrate achieving that goal. And then also closing our achievement gap. The first 2 goals really happen by accomplishing the 3rd, and that is how do we take students who are in the margins in terms of achievement and accelerate their growth in the system, because once we do that, we all gain from that. The aggregate obviously gains from that. I want to share that we are measured in 2 ways, and most of you may know this, but we are measured by proficiency, which is the absolute score. It's the mathematical number. What do our kids score numerically? And we are also measured by growth. Growth gives schools a way to show success when the number may not necessarily demonstrate that. The state measures us by growth in 3 ways. You didn't meet growth, which means you did not grow students a year for the year that they spent with you. If you met growth, you did that. So for 1 year of time in school, you grew as a student would be predicted to grow. And then the third category is exceeds growth. And that means that the average number of students who are assessed in a school or a grade level or even a classroom we can look at grew more than they were expected to grow in a year's worth of time. So I'm going to start with the absolute numbers. And I hope you can see these again. You can dig deep into these numbers on our website. We have lots of information loaded there. What I would say to you is that our numbers overall are relatively static. Not something we're thrilled about. We've seen some gains, as you will see here, significantly in Math 1, as well as biology, and even English 2 over time. Our high schools have made huge progress, particularly in this last year. On that gap goal in particular, I would tell you that 51% of our high schools in this district either made huge progress towards the 10% or met the 10% on the gap. So we've seen some real movement at the secondary level. Most challenging to us is the third grade reading. And I wish I had a magic wand in terms of how we continue to look at, dissect, and understand what will move that. We have tremendous investment going on in literacy in this district, and I want to assure you that not only as a school system are folks working hard with training, with resources, but also as a community you are. With the investment of Project Impact in the last 2 years, we have opened 14 new pre-K classrooms. We have virtually cut our pre-K waiting list in more than half and are serving children who otherwise would not have an opportunity to have a pre-K experience. As we track those children moving into kindergarten, we're seeing success rates there. And so our hope is that, again, as with many other things you've heard this morning, we're laying a foundation to see improvement in that third grade reading score. I would also here like to just say we don't thank our legislature very much, and this is an area that they have helped us tremendously because we've had folks wanting to leave third grade. They don't want to teach third grade because all eyes are on third grade. You're under a microscope, and we all know that that score doesn't just happen in third grade. And the last 2 years, the legislature has put a very substantial bonus for teachers who are in the top 25% in the state in that third grade reading score. And when I say substantial, I'm saying between $4,000 and $7,000 as substantial. And so in your district last year, you had more than 50 third grade teachers who saw a substantial increase in that bonus. And that has been helpful to us in recruiting and keeping teachers who are good teachers that we need in these primary grades to help us with reading. We like to show the urban comparisons, and you will see here where we rank. Generally, we are neck and neck with Guilford. Charlotte and Wake typically outscore us in terms of the proficiency number. So now I want to share some good news with you. The proficiency numbers, we get them first, and we begin to pull them apart and analyze and look at those places in our district that did really well and what are they doing and how can we translate that across the district. And then later in the summer, we see growth. And this helps us see how did we do in our district compared to other districts and the state as well. So I want to tell you, if you look at these circles, you will see our growth for the last few years. And what I'm proud to tell you is that we have a 4-year high in the number of schools that have exceeded growth this past school year and a 4-year low in the number of schools that did not meet growth. We're very excited about this, especially when we put it in the context of our urban colleagues. Won't call them competitors today, but when we put the scores together, we often look at it that way. So if you'll look at our scores in the middle, we, with Exceeds growth, balance out with Guilford. But for the first time since we've been measuring these numbers, our growth numbers have exceeded Wake County and Charlotte-Mecklenburg, particularly in Exceeds growth. And that just gives you the raw numbers in terms of where we were last year versus this year, 8 and 23. You may also know that 2 years ago the state started designating low-performing schools when they put grades on schools, and we're incredibly proud to tell you that we have reduced the number of low-performing schools in this district from 32 to 23. If you do that math, it looks like 9. We actually had 11 schools come off the list, but we had 2 schools go on. So we lowered the number. We still have work to do. I want to share just a little bit with you that summer programs we believe have had a direct impact on student growth. In particular, our ability to serve literally thousands of children in the summer, helping them be more ready to start a new grade level. For the last 2 summers, we have run our summer programming by the district as opposed to years prior when we contracted that work out. We've seen dramatically improved results in particularly the state measure in the summer, which is Read to Achieve for 3rd graders. Not only have we seen larger numbers of students be able to pass that assessment in summer school and go on to 4th grade, but we are able to administer that assessment again in the fall. And so next month, students who are in what we call a transition class, because the law does not allow them to go on to 4th grade until they pass this assessment, will take the assessment again. And if they pass it, they become 4th graders. What we found last year is that we actually doubled the number of students when we took the fall administration, and our students who had participated in summer school well outperformed those who had not participated. So we know that while students might not make it in that window of 4 weeks in the summer, that boost of summer helps them in the fall when they can take the assessment again. I'm also incredibly proud because of your investment. We also have served 500 children the past 2 summers in a new program called Pathway to K. These are also children who have never had pre-K experiences, and they come in for a 3-week program in the summer. And it's absolutely remarkable what little people learn and absorb in a very short period of time, and how it has improved their trajectory in kindergarten. And we shortly will have some numbers once we share them with the Project Impact Board and our Board of Education to show that even that 3 weeks can really have a fairly substantial impact on how well children perform throughout and at the end of kindergarten. And we'll continue to track those children as a cohort as they move through our system to really see impact of that. If you ever want to see any of these programs, I invite you. There is nothing more joyful than pre-K. I can tell you. Several of us went with Speaker Moore last week in Cook Literacy Model School, and people always get caught up in pre-K and can't get out. I don't know whether it's playing with dinosaurs or exactly what it is that's appealing, but we're excited about our ability to impact kindergarten readiness. And I know that you all have heard me say this before, but if a child enters kindergarten 2 years behind, we can do what we're supposed to do, which is grow a year for a year. And that child stays behind their entire educational journey. So if we can close that gap early and we can continue to accelerate, then we can close this gap and we can help kids catch up and be successful graduates. Last year we implemented 6 imperatives. We have indicators that are attached to these imperatives. We've measured them. And because we believe they worked, they've stayed with us. And we will keep using them. Instead of trying to change up the game, it is how do we find those strategies that we believe are effective in our schools. And sometimes folks don't like this. It takes away a little bit of their flexibility, but we know these are research-based. And in the schools where we have seen pretty phenomenal growth in the past year, we know that folks are using these strategies in the way that the district has coached, guided them, and supported them to use them. I want to say a quick word before I sit down about another strategy that I believe has helped us, and that is leadership. You can look at all the research about change and all the research in schools about what works and what doesn't, but at the end of the day, if you don't have good, strong leaders who are passionate about their work, you won't see the change. We have invested heavily with the support of this community through Peer Project, Chamber support, United Way, Project Impact. All of you have helped us really be very strategic about developing leaders. We've had a lot of turnover, but I want to tell you, we have some amazing folks out there leading our schools. They're on fire. They want to work in challenging places, and I believe that we're just beginning to see the result of that investment. And so we thank you for your tremendous support, not only of the facilities in which we work every day and the opportunities we have going forward, but for the amazing people that work in our school system, many of whom this is home, and that is how we keep them and why they want to be here and work in your school system. So thank you.
Well, thank you. You've all been very patient. We tried, our goal was to get you out of here at 11:45. We're a couple minutes over, but we got started just a couple minutes late. So if you'll give me just one quick second to kind of tell you what I think we're seeing there. We did see that our job growth did slow last year. Our key drivers in manufacturing, health, and education grew more slowly all across the state of North Carolina, so that helped impacted us. We have made good progress in all these major efforts that you've seen, but the job growth has not come along as fast as we would like, particularly in Whitaker Park. We've been spending so much time getting that ready, Innovation Quarter, and with the entrepreneurial efforts. We're so excited about the new poverty reduction initiative, and I want to thank Cindy Gordier and the United Way for their leadership. And we think we're getting really close to having the funding in place to hire a staff that will wake up and deal with this every day. We want someone to work on that hard. We have seen a significant creation of incubation and entrepreneurial space here in our community, and you just saw, Bev, the numbers that she's put out there, solid gains in education. We've got to find more land for Bob Leake to put buildings on and for the Chamber to grow companies on, and we're working on that. We'll also say that the statistics that Gail showed you in terms of the Moody's ranking, that particular ranking is a much broader ranking than what we set our goal on in terms of moving our community to one of the top 50. We're just looking at jobs, and I think we're still about at 141 in that regard, so a long ways to go. So we'll hope that you'll, if you have questions, you can send them to me at this web address, alan.joins@wsalliance.org. And, of course, we'll come back next year. I do want to just pause and say goodbye to Gail Anderson, who is retiring at the end of this year at the Chamber. She's done a wonderful job for our community. Let's thank Gail. So Gail can come back next year and kibitz. There you go. Thank you all for coming. We'll see you next year.